Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. It's emerged that the special advisors dealing with the IndyRef court case, when Sturgeon took the government to court because they refused to allow a second referendum, didn't even plan for victory. They knew going in that they were going to lose it. They knew that they were losing it. They knew there was no hope of winning it. And yet still they went ahead at great expense just to prove a point. The point being that look at how terrible Westminster is. It's not allowing us to have a referendum, even though we had one and lost. So Sturgeon has gone and squandered tons of money, loads of money, on a case she knew she couldn't possibly win. Perhaps somebody should send her a bill. Perhaps the law should be changed that if any politician goes to court despite legal advice saying otherwise, then they personally should be liable for costs. I think that would stop a lot of the crap that's going on. But this is unbelievable. We'll take a look at this. But it just goes to show how politics overrides common sense and how the taxpayer is fleeced at every turn just to push an agenda. Here goes. Right, so if you cast your mind back, first of all, to 2014, you had the independence referendum. The votes were cast, and the vote was to remain in the Union. That was the voice of the people. But of course, Sturgeon didn't like the voice of the people, and she demanded just a few years later to let's have another vote. She said that there was grounds for another vote because, democracy sucks, basically. And so she asked for it. The UK government said, no, there's no grounds. Go away, you silly little woman. She didn't like that either. And so she decided that she would take this matter all the way up to the Supreme Court. And this was about a year ago, I think. So I think it was just before Christmas, wasn't it? Yeah, about a year ago. Anyway, so about a year ago, they went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, no, you have no grounds for an independence referendum. But of course, she knew going into court that she could not win the case. And they knew that because nobody had even made preparations in case they did. Because they knew they couldn't. The legal advice must have been, don't do this, you're not going to win. And yet, she did. At great expense. It costs a lot of money taking a case to the Supreme Court. Money that could be better spent, I think, on things that people actually care about. And not one woman's mad dreams of becoming the Queen of Scotland. Far from that. She's more likely to become the Queen of Barlinnie if everything works out according to plan. Anyway, the SNP SPAD, Special Advisors, didn't bother even preparing press lines if they'd won the IndyRef 2 Supreme Court case because they knew in advance, don't waste your time, it's never going to happen. The Scottish Government failed in its bid to force a second Skexit vote, and it appeared officials never held out much hope that the attempt would succeed in the first place, because it was never going to. And she must have had that advice, otherwise they would have done these things. Said, well, we might win. Let's get this all sorted. They didn't bother their arse because, hey, Anyway, the SPADs to the Scottish Government didn't bother preparing press lines if the executive won its Supreme Court case to hold a second independence referendum. It has emerged Nicola Sturgeon infamously took the UK government to court in an attempt to force through a fresh Skexit vote. But of course the court said, no, you go and be away with yourself, young lady. You're not having a vote. You've had one. The people have spoken. Move on with your life. Go get one, basically. The bid failed, with the court concluding power in relation to the Constitution lay with Westminster because it is not what she was pushing it. It's a voluntary. She was pushing the little line of it being a voluntary union, but it's not. It's a legal union. And the judges ruled that any vote administered by the Scottish Government could have an impact on the future of the UK. And it seems government officials knew they were doomed to fail in their court bid. And a Freedom of Information response published earlier this month shows that the SPADs to SNP ministers did not even feel the need to prepare press lines if they were successful. Because of course not. Of course not. There's no way they were going to win because it's the law. It isn't a judge's opinion of the law. It quite clearly just is the law. Instead, they produced advice assuming a negative verdict, and it warned the Scottish Government officials not to criticise the court, instead saying they were doing their job from a legal perspective. They didn't like the answer, and they didn't want to put up with the answer, and they're trying their damn best to change it all the time. But people are fed up with it. They don't want it. Anyway, the briefing says the government is committed to the rule of law. Good, obey it. That would make a change. I love the way they say they're committed to the rule of the law, and yet so many of them keep breaking it. Ain't it weird? And they are committed to ensuring the people of Scotland can exercise their democratic rights, which they did, and they voted to remain. The paper advises ministers to accuse the UK government of blocking the democratic rights of the people of Scotland. No, the people of Scotland voted and said remain. It was Sturgeon and her little coterie of criminals that decided that, democracy didn't matter anymore. The Spads wrote they wanted it thrown out as they didn't want the substantive case to be heard because they didn't want the nature of the union to be exposed in this way. Aha! There we go. Such a ruling makes it clear in the absence... I remember this from the time, that's all. I wasn't being clever. Don't think I'm being clever. I just remember this from a year ago. It was in the absence of a 2014 referendum-style process that the UK is not a voluntary union. I wasn't being clever there. I do remember it. I remember this saying. There she is. There's a woman who shouldn't be in government. If she's head of justice, she should be independent, but she's not, which is why you've got no justice in Scotland. That's why they keep having to go to the Supreme Court, I suppose. Their own court isn't good enough. Because it's a corrupted court when you've got the head of justice sitting in the cabinet. It's a corruptible court, isn't it? Anyway, the document adds Scotland is a country with the right to... That's what this is what the SNP was saying. That Scotland is a country with the right to self-determination and our democratic decisions must matter. So this is the time, now more than ever, to intensify the democratic campaign for both Scotland's independence and for the right of people in Scotland to decide their own future. And the people of Scotland did decide their own future, and they decided to remain. And instead of having their own government, they send representatives down to the United Kingdom government in Westminster. Again, what the SNP don't like, but unfortunately have to accept. Sucks being in the SNP when democracy works against you. Which is why I suppose they're trying their damnedest to remove it and to remove people from any kind of decision-making process, because people are a problem to the SNP. The case has been referred to the Supreme Court by the Scottish Government's top law officer, Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain, KC, and despite her admitting she did not have the necessary degree of confidence in the submission, that Holyrood had the power to hold a vote. So basically her legal advice is, look, I'll do it because you want me to, but I don't think you're going to win. My advice is don't do it, but if you're going to do it, I'll put it through for you. Well, why weren't they listening to Bain and say when she's saying you're not going to win? Could have saved a fortune. Could have gone and maybe saved some lives. But hey, when people die, that's the price the SNP are willing to pay. In a judgment passed down on November the 23rd last year, well, just over a year ago then, I was close, the court decided that it was clear, a proposed referendum bill has more than a loose or consequential connection with the reserved matters of the Union of Scotland and England and the sovereignty of the United Kingdom Parliament. In other words, the Constitution does not belong to the Scottish Parliament, Holyrood. It belongs to the Westminster Parliament, and it's up to the politicians there to decide. It's an easy thing to hold. Miss Sturgeon had wanted to hold a second vote on October the 19th this year, and we did do the mock election. There was, oh God, what was his name? Alex Salmon did the mock thing with the papers where he goes along with his little vote into an office or a Portaloo or something and casts his vote. What a tot, what an absolute twonk. Anyway, she quit in February, not a day too soon, and the date passed without a poll, and so will the next date and the date after that, and there won't be one for at least a generation, which, depending on how long you call a generation, will be about another 10 to 15 years, maybe. But as it goes on, fewer and fewer people are wanting independence because more and more people are waking up, smelling the coffee and seeing how bad Scotland is under an SNP government. And just imagine how bad it would be if there was no safety net of Westminster to pick up the pieces when it all goes Pete Tong. Anyway, I shall round off there. I shall come up and we shall finish the video. Do you know, it really must be quite depressing being the SNP. You lose every court case you've ever fought. 8. They've had 8 court cases now. And they've lost every single one of them. Unbelievable. That's just in this parliament. It's literally the last couple of years. 8 and lost all 8. Because what they keep proposing are utterly ludicrous. Now, of course, Alibaba is considering, and he's only got a few days left. It's not long now. Where are we? The 19th. So he's got 10 days left. Of which, you know, you've got weekends, you've got Christmas and Boxing Day there off, and so forth. So he's got very few working days left in which to decide whether to take the gender bill to the Supreme Court. And of course, he'll have been told he'll lose that as well. But he may still do it because he's got to keep the Greens happy for some weird reason that nobody is fully aware of. So that could be 9 court cases lost. All very expensive court cases. I'd like to know what the total bill over that time will be on legal advice. And we need to see the legal advice, because if he is going and doing these court cases despite the legal advice being don't do it, then, you know, there's grounds there for a criminal prosecution for misuse of public funds. That also would be nice. And if that is the case, and it does come out that the legal advice was don't do it, I think he needs to be prosecuted. That needs to be an official complaint with the police. Anyway, it's just one of those things ongoing. But I'll stop there. Thank you very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button. We're getting close to the 9,000, which I'd love the 9,000 for Christmas. So do please hit that. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and I will speak to you later. Bye.